Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, in a matter of days, the contentious and sometimes ugly campaign season will finally come to an end and our political leaders will finally be chosen. But the questions surrounding real and really meaningful policy decisions, well, that will likely linger well past the January inaugurations as those we elect finally get back to the business of governing. Thanks for joining us for the most widely watched source for Carolina business and public policy. I'm Mark Boone, in this week for Chris William. On this program, North Carolina's chief consumer watchdog and enforcer of laws, the state's Attorney General, Roy Cooper.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, health care, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising health care costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded October 19, 2012. On this week's program, an executive profile featuring North Carolina's Attorney General, Roy Cooper. Now, substituting for Chris William, here is Mark Boone.
Well, I wanted to welcome, Your Honor, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. I wanted to start fairly broadly. And of course, you're no stranger to politics in this state, having served first in the General Assembly and now in your current role. 26 years by my count, I guess, you've been on the ballot in one
I've
form
really
or
counted,
another.
so I'm glad to know that, Mark.
But unopposed this fall on November's ballot, just as you were in the primary. So as someone who's able to kind of sit on the sidelines, so to speak, what do you think about this current election cycle, both the conversations, the political rhetoric, and what policy issues are we missing as we watch this play out?
Well, I'm very glad to be with you, Mark, and Carolina Business Review has just done such a great job over the years with in-depth conversations about issues facing the people of North Carolina and surrounding areas. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. You know, it's a contentious campaign, and particularly in North Carolina, we're a state that's being targeted. We're a close state. And we in North Carolina, we elect a lot of our officials that many other states appoint. So there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk going back and forth. I want to encourage people to make sure you pay attention to what's going on, even though it's difficult with the backbiting and the fighting going on. You know, we hear a lot about jobs in the economy, and I think that that's an important thing. One of the issues I don't think we hear enough about and really can't hear enough about is preparing our students and our people, particularly those who have lost jobs, for the jobs of the future. We need to make sure that our education systems are in place. Central Piedmont Community College, who sponsors this show and works with this show, they do a good job of making sure we train workers for the jobs that we have. And you're going to need special training there. We don't talk enough about that. And then my bailiwick, crime, being the chief law enforcement officer of the state. We need more technology to fight crime. We need to make sure we keep up with that technology. The crime rates have been going down over the last decade, and maybe that's one of the reasons that we don't hear enough about it. But I think when you ask people the number one thing they want government to do and how they want to invest their tax dollars, they want to be safe in their own homes and in their jobs and their kids at school. They want to make sure that they're safe. So strong law enforcement with the right tools and technology, I want to hear more about that. I certainly talk about it a lot, and I'm going to continue to do that.
Well, let me go back to the education component of that for just a moment. Certainly, we're going to have a new person in the governor's mansion, no question about that. The General Assembly, The only question there seems to be whether the Republicans get a supermajority for this next session. What about education in this state, and is, in your view, as a former member of the General Assembly, is education funding as contentious as it's been made out to be in recent months?
Well, it's a contentious issue because people don't want to pay taxes, and I understand that. But what we need to make sure that we do is prioritize and invest our dollars in education and make sure we're doing it the right way. Our business people can tell us a lot about the kind of jobs that are coming, the kind of people that we need, and the kind of training that we need. And we need to do a better job of coordinating our universities, our community colleges, and our K through 12 with businesses to make sure that we're sending them the right kind of employees. Because there are a lot of jobs these days, I don't necessarily say high tech, but many jobs today require special training. And we need to make sure that we gear our education system to those kinds of jobs and the right kind of training for our people. And that's going to take bipartisan cooperation across the board. It's going to take educators and business people working together. I certainly want to foster that from my position as Attorney General.
Yep, that, of course, education is directly related to many of the things that your office does. But I did want to ask you, speaking from somebody who's passionate in education, you have now held this office going into your fourth term as the state's Attorney General. Your own party has recruited you once at least to run for a different kind of office at the federal level. What are your aspirations beyond the state's Attorney General?
Well, I'm hopefully about to be elected unopposed for another term as Attorney General. And Mark, that's where I'm concentrating. Yes, I've had people talk to me about other offices and other positions, but being the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state, being the Chief Lawyer for North Carolina, I wake up every day excited. I generally learn something new every day. You name an issue across this table, the North Carolina Department of Justice is going to be involved in it in one way or another. And that's really where I'm concentrating my efforts, and I think the last 12 years is proof of that.
You have certainly a number of irons in the fire, recently announcing that you're looking more closely at hospitals in this state and the pricing of services. Is this an issue in your view of transparency?
Transparency is part of it. We know healthcare costs are high. The small business person struggling to pay that insurance premium for the employees knows about the high cost of healthcare. Before I became Attorney General, I was a managing law partner in my law firm, and making sure we met those expenses and kept insurance for our employees was critically important. We know how much insurance premiums are. We know how much deductibles are. People are frustrated with the high cost of health care. One of the things that is very difficult to find out is how much you're being charged. And if you want to base your health care decisions on pricing or how much you're going to pay, good luck trying to figure out how much you're going to end up paying at the end of the day and how you can compare that. So I do think transparency plays a role in trying to drive down healthcare costs.
So how do you drive the industry toward being more transparent? My understanding is you're looking at both antitrust issues potentially. On the other side of that would be what legislative issues that you could address it through a bill?
Healthcare is rapidly changing. One of the ways that hospitals have looked at facing the new challenges is that they have consolidated with many of the physician practices across North Carolina. They used to be separate, but now many of the physician practices are part of hospital empires, if you will. There are only a few hospitals in North Carolina. I think most of the hospitals in Mecklenburg County, as we said, are controlled by two companies. So they're going in and taking over these practices. Now what they say is that they're trying to coordinate the efforts, that they are trying to avoid duplication of tests, and that when they integrate the data and integrate their efforts and can talk to each other better, that they can drive down the costs of health care. One of the concerns we see, however, are they eliminating competition? And when they go to the insurance companies to negotiate reimbursement rates, are the insurance companies backed against the wall because they can't say no because they know that their customers would be furious if they took out the largest hospital in the county? We're looking at the potential use of antitrust laws. We know the Federal Trade Commission. We know several states, including California, Nevada, Pennsylvania. All of them have looked at whether we need to use antitrust laws to address what's happening with consolidation, whether it needs to be modified. And we also need to look at whether we need some legislation to deal with that, because we're seeing great disparities in charges from one patient to the next, depending on what kind of insurance you have.
At the same facility?
At the same facility, yeah. Whether you're a Medicaid patient, whether you're a Medicare patient, whether you're private insurance, whether you're a public employee, oftentimes you're seeing a significant difference in what people are being charged. The hospitals readily admit this, that it's part of the cost shifting that they do. The issue is, can it be put more under control, and can we make things fairer to the patients? We have one of the best, if not the best, healthcare system in the world, and the technology is incredible, and the work they do is amazing. We need to make sure, however, with healthcare costs becoming more and more a major portion of the gross domestic product, that we try to control those costs as much as possible. That's important for economic development, and it's important for the well-being of families in North Carolina.
Part of the current political dialogue has certainly been the role of government in both businesses, and I guess in this case, you're talking about both public hospitals and for-profit hospitals. What, in your view, is the role of your office when managing both the hospital pricing situation that you're investigating, and we'll talk a little bit more about Duke Energy and their rate increase that they're looking at, that my understanding is going before the state Supreme Court?
Yeah, well, one of the things we want to do is to root out fraud in healthcare system. And I have a Medicaid fraud unit, and their mission is to go in and investigate these cases and recover money back. We've arrested a person who was a mental health counselor who was billing for patients he never saw, all the way to giant pharmaceutical companies like Abbott Labs, who were marketing their drugs for uses that have not been approved yet. Those kinds of healthcare fraud we investigate, and over the last decade, we've gotten over $500 million back for taxpayers to try to direct the money where it's supposed to go, healthcare that people can't afford. So that's one way that we do things. With the antitrust laws, I think it's important that you try and make sure you avoid monopolies. You have a lot of businesses who do not want government involved in their business, but oftentimes we get visits from businesses when one company begins to corner the market in an area, and they believe unfairly drive up prices and drive them out of the market. So some of the first people they come to see are state attorneys general about how can you use antitrust laws to make it fair and to level the playing field. Government should be limited, but there are ways that government can make our lives better, and ways that the government can be used to protect consumers in North Carolina, and we're working hard to do that.
Well, let's talk about the current rate increase that Duke Energy has proposed, 7.2%. This is something that's gone before the Utilities Commission. And your office, is it a parallel path, would you say, is also involved in looking at that, and what issue do you have before the state Supreme Court?
The job of the Attorney General is to protect consumers, and we have the right to intervene in utilities cases. Now, our utilities in North Carolina, Duke, Progress, Dominion, have been important partners in economic development. When you try to bring a business into North Carolina, the kind of utility rates they're going to pay, the reliability and quality of energy is important, and they've been good partners. But it's important from my perspective that we keep utility rates at a reasonable cost with quality service. Duke came forward and asked for in excess of a 15% increase in their utility rates at a time when most businesses and working families were dealing with even less income. That was frustrating to me. That's why we intervened in this case to say, that's too much. We did get the Utilities Commission to reduce that request to 7.2%, but we think that's too high. And one of the reasons that we think that's too high is we believe that the law requires the Utilities Commission to look at the changing economic conditions, not only as it affects the utilities company's rate of return, but how it affects the consumer. In this case, they allowed a 10.5% return on equity, which is essentially profit. Now, that's a pretty good deal during changing economic times and the difficult economic times that we have just come out of. We think that's too high. We're going to ask the court to send this case back to the Utilities Commission and to require them to look at comparing the rate of return and the difficulty that consumers are going through with their expert witnesses. And we believe that that will result in a lower rate of return that should be put forth in this situation and in other rate cases that are coming down the pike right now.
And I suppose Duke has said that part of that, what goes into that rate of return is the capital investment that they continue to make in their infrastructure.
Well, and they're arguing that it's important to have this rate of return for their investments. They've argued that it's important for their credit rating, but one of the problems with that, they said in fact that if they don't have the right return on equity, that it could result in a lowering of their credit rating, which they described in one of their legal briefs as would be disastrous. However, we have the situation with the recent merger with Progress, where some actions they took in removing the CEO resulted in a downgrade of credit rating, but they said, we have a strong balance sheet, we're going to be okay. So which is it? And we believe that they can take a lower return on equity, a significantly lower return on equity in changing economic times, particularly when you compare what consumers and businesses and others are having to go through and the rate of return that they're getting on their money.
Speaking of the CEO situation at Duke Energy and shortly after the merger, your office did get involved in looking at exactly what happened at the board level and other agencies related to the merger talks. Where does that stand, and why did your office get involved when the Utilities Commission is also looking at this?
Our office has the right to investigate malfeasance by a utility company. We were already involved in this rate case. We are interested, number one, in reasonable rates and quality service. We were concerned that the actions right after the merger may negatively affect those two things. We believe that it was important to move forward with this investigation. We are coordinating somewhat with the Utilities Commission and their investigation as well, but our attorneys now are reviewing thousands of pages of documents to determine this very issue as to whether this has affected reasonable rates and quality service. That's our mission, to find out what happens. And any remedy that we would propose to the Utilities Commission or through the courts would be related to that and how we can make sure that we get there. And we're going to move as expeditiously as possible. It's important to move this forward, and we're working on that.
So this is not necessarily an issue of corporate governance and the decisions, the conversations that are had at a publicly owned utility with its board members. This is an issue of consumer protection in your view?
We're looking at it as consumer protection. Remember, you have a regulated monopoly here, and it's important that the Utilities Commission has all of the facts to be able to decide what to do. They didn't have the facts because things were different than what Duke had told them they were going to be. So trust is very important in making sure that you have the truth. That also translates into rate cases. Are you getting the right kind of information from the company in order to make good quality decisions about any rate increases that are proposed? We think these things are tied in together, And that's why we're conducting this investigation, and we're going to move on it.
Part of the Utilities Commission investigation it has involved testimony within public view. And we saw something that you don't see every day, which was a former CEO who got very emotional and shed some tears in front of the commission. How much of, from your view, how much of this is kind of the emotions behind what happens when you have a company with a very large presence in Raleigh and another company with a very large presence in Charlotte? Is there any push and pull? Is there any emotion behind this? Is that kind of what's playing out in public view here?
None whatsoever for my office and me. We're concerned with fair rates and quality service. And that's all that we are looking at. And clearly this has had some effect on the ability of the company to do those things. We've seen a reduction of the credit rating. We are conducting this investigation on that basis. We're not concerned about personnel. We're not concerned about who the board of directors chooses to be the CEO as much as we are about being forthcoming, telling regulators what you're going to do, what you intend to do, and making sure that we get the correct information, particularly as we go forward with these rate increase hearings.
Shifting gears a little bit to the financial industry, another industry that you've looked closely at throughout the course of your career, both in the General Assembly and in your current role as Attorney General. Payday lending, something that was driven out of the state quite a long time ago, but in some form or another, you believe may be creeping back in.
Payday lending is companies who come in and loan money to people short term based upon a 2 or 3 week time. The interest that they end up charging effectively with the fees they put on people, 300% and 400%, sometimes exceeding that number. We saw a lot of this payday lending creep up in the mid-2000s in North Carolina around our military bases. These companies seek out those with a regular paycheck and often those who have some inexperience with managing their paychecks. We believe this practice was so egregious that we ran it out of North Carolina. These payday lending companies would try everything to get around our law. We've always had strong interest rate and strong usury laws in North Carolina to protect our consumers, but they would do things to try to get around it. They would try affiliating with a national bank. They would try affiliating with a state chartered bank. They would try pretending they were doing something else, like renting internet time or dealing with auto sales, but in fact they were entering into payday loans. Having a payday loan is like needing a life preserver and being thrown an anvil. I mean, seriously, it's the kind of thing that a lot of consumers get on a debt treadmill and is not helpful at all to them in getting them back on their feet. In fact, it drives them often further into debt. So we were able to get them out of North Carolina. But we've seen over the past few months a company, a state chartered bank out of Alabama, to begin making payday loans in North Carolina, using its status as a state chartered bank and using the argument that they are not making storefront loans in North Carolina. They say they are making these loans over the internet. So we're seeing this coming back into North Carolina. The internet and computers and technology have been a wonderful boon for the economy, but they have made things more difficult oftentimes for law enforcers, because now things that you outlaw in your state can be done over the internet, and it is more difficult for a state law enforcer to get to the culprit.
And you've written both the FDIC, copied the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I know there's a lot of federal issues that we didn't get to,
right,
as far as Dodd-Frank and whether that's hurtful or helpful, so we'll have to have you back to talk more about your partners in Washington.
That'll be
Thank
great.
you very much for joining us. A couple of quick notes before we leave you. We'd like you to look at our newly redesigned website, carolinabusinessreview.com. There you can watch this program along with dozens of other programs in our archives. That's carolinabusinessreview.com. Also, this program is now on Twitter. We hope you'll tweet us, and we hope you will follow us. Our Twitter handle is @CarolinaPolicy, so follow us on Twitter if you would, please, and of course check us out as always on Facebook. Chris William will be back next week, back in this same spot. I'm Mark Boone. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.